Welcome to the Orthodontic Pearls podcast, where we share tips and tricks to better your clinic, business, and life.
Today we have our honored guest, Dr. Jim Dahle of the White Coat Investor, as we discuss the concept of living like a resident, choosing index funds over stocks, and how to invest your money to reach financial independence.
And now your hosts of the podcast, Drs. Chris Teeters, Brian Anderson, and Andy Sarpadar.
All right. Well, today we're going to structure the podcast a little bit differently. We're going to try something. If this works, we're going to use it going forward. What we realize is that each of the hosts here has a slightly different focus, slightly different set of skills. So Chris is going to start us off with some of the pearls, financial wisdom, asking Jim some questions, and we'll see where that goes. I'm going to follow that up with the devil's advocate position. All of you guys who know me, that comes as a huge surprise, I'm sure. You know, I challenge Jim on some of his more controversial opinions and maybe some of the things that people take for granted, but I want to push back and maybe see another side of that. Finally, we're going to be wrapping up with the philosopher himself, Brian Anderson, and he has some questions that will apply to our mindsets, a more global perspective, and just kind of the way that we see the world. So why don't we kick it off here, Chris, and let's talk about some financial pearls.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. I appreciate it. Well, Jim, like I said, I've been a huge fan. I put all my money in VT Sachs back when I read all your articles on that, and it's done very well. I'd never even used a financial advisor. I liked your thought of, why spend 2% of your portfolio annually when statistically it's not much different than investing in the whole stock market. Looking at today, if you had 3 stocks to pick from, has that changed and what would they be?
I'm not even sure what 3 stocks I would invest in. I'll be honest. I really have zero interest in analyzing individual stocks. And part of that is just from looking at the data over the years that it shows it's so hard to do it in a way that is likely to outperform just buying all the stocks.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing about that concept is that it frees up all this mental energy and ability to stop spending time on an activity that adds no value to not only your portfolio, but your life. You can take that energy and put it somewhere else.
100%.
Whether that's some other aspect of your financial plan or whether that's, recreation or a relationship or something that matters more in your life. But I'll be honest, I don't think about individual stocks. If you asked me to name them, maybe I could come up with 30 or 40.
Okay.
But I don't have favorites, and certainly nobody should ever take a stock pick from me.
But you have fund advice, right? For like an index fund. You had VT Sachs, then you had like the international, and then you had a third one. I don't remember quite what it was. I don't know if that's changed over the years or what those 3 would be if it were more of a group mutual fund type of a decision.
My portfolio has gotten slightly simpler over the years, but basically we're still investing in the same stuff that we wrote down in residency that we were going to invest in. So
Awesome.
About 25% of my money is in VT Sachs, or typically the ETF equivalent, VTI. That's the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund. It's 25% of our portfolio. It has been for more than 2 decades. Obviously, it had a great run the last 10 years. U.S. large growth tech stocks have just smashed it out of the park compared to bonds and real estate and small and value kind of stocks. And so that's obviously been wonderful to have that in our portfolio. Now, of course, you look back and you go, man, I wish I had everything in that, or I wish I had everything in tech stocks. But of course, that's, the upside and downside of diversification. You always have something that's not doing that well if you're truly diversified. If you're happy with everything you own, you're probably not that diversified. So that's a big part of our portfolio. We have some money in small value stocks in the U.S. stock market as well. And so we kind of tilt a little bit away from those large and growth stocks. People are worrying about this now that large and growth stocks have had a tear. I've been worried about this for 20 years. So I've owned it for a long time. Now, obviously that didn't do so well the last 10 years compared to large growth stocks, but it's something we've held and we continue to hold. Now that's about 40% of our portfolio between, U.S. stocks. Another 20% is in international stocks. So we have a couple of funds there. The main one is just a total international stock market fund. At Vanguard, that's VXUS. At iShares, that's IXUS. Fidelity has a version. Schwab has a version. Mm-hmm. It's just all the international stocks. US, or not US, but European stocks, Pacific stocks, emerging market stocks. It basically just buys them all, recognizing that we'll own all the winners Yes,
Sure.
we'll own the losers as well, but we're going to own all the winners at very low cost, and you don't have to worry about manager risk. It's very tax efficient, et cetera.
Awesome.
Then once you get away from stocks, we have about 20% of our portfolio in bonds and 20% in real estate. So it's been a fairly straightforward plan that we've just followed over the years, and from the time we were broke until the time we were financially independent and beyond. But
Wonderful.
that's, people are asking me for stock recommendations. I recommend they own all of them.
How about tax shielded retirement opportunities, like vehicles to invest in those things, but also avoid paying as much to the government if not necessary?
Yeah, well, some of tax efficiency is your behavior, right? It's just buying and holding. Buying and holding is very tax efficient. If you ask Warren Buffett his favorite holding period for a stock, he'll say forever.
Yeah.
And part of the reason for that is because it's very tax efficient. If you ask real estate investors, how long should you go before you sell your real estate investment? And the answer is never sell. If you want a different one, exchange it, in essentially a tax-free exchange, a 1031 exchange, hold it till you die and get that step up in basis. So behavior is a big part of tax efficiency. Another big part, though, is taking advantage of tax-protected accounts. And the government wants you to do some things in your life, right? It wants you to go to college. It wants you to save for your kids' college. It wants you to take care of your body, buy health care. It wants you to save for retirement. And so it has decided to subsidize all of those activities. And the way it subsidizes it is by offering these special accounts where your money can grow in a tax-protected way. So for retirement, we're talking about accounts like 401ks and 403bs and 457bs and Roth IRAs, these sorts of accounts. For college, we're talking about 529 accounts and similar accounts. For healthcare, we're talking about health savings accounts. All of these are tax-protected accounts that allow your money to essentially grow faster than it would otherwise.
Sure.
It's also very beneficial that inside those accounts, your money is protected from creditors in most states. And so if you had to, heaven forbid, you had an above policy limits judgment against you and you had to declare bankruptcy, you pretty much get to keep your retirement accounts. So it's another great reason to max them out, besides the fact that your money grows faster in them due to that protection from taxation. So that's the other big secret, if you want to pay less money in taxes, is use those accounts as much as you can.
Yeah.
And that'll help reduce your tax bill.
Perfect. I love how you talked about behavior and being good at investing. A book I read recently, which is somewhat counter to it, is Die with Zero. I don't know if you've read that quite yet, but the whole idea is kind of give away a lot of your money in the middle of life to your kids when it could really push the needle for them. Or most of us will die with more in the bank, not realizing it when our health is better now. I know that contrasts a lot of things. What are your thoughts on that book and balancing those philosophies of investment and also living your best life?
I love the book. The book is not perfect, but I love the book. In fact, it is my favorite book for somebody who is already wealthy or getting close to being wealthy.
Yes.
Or who's having trouble spending. And this is a big problem for people who are good enough savers to become wealthy. It's very hard for people to spend their money in retirement. If you look at studies, it suggests that people, the studies show you can spend like 4%-ish of your money every year in retirement with very low risk of running out of money. But the truth is that most people that acquire any sort of portfolio at all do not spend that much. They're just spending the income, which is some number lower than that. Right. Because people suck at spending money they've been saving for years and years and years and years. And so I think a book and a mindset like that encapsulated in Die with Zero is very, very helpful for those people. I love some of the points he makes in that book. For example, most inheritances are received around age 60. Well, I don't need to inherit any money at age 60. Right. I'm already plenty wealthy at age 60. I've got my financial life set. When do you need money? Well, you need money between 25 and 35. But that's not when anybody gets inheritances. Right. So Bill Perkins in that book argues, maybe you ought to think about giving some of that money earlier. Figure out exactly how much you need and give the rest away earlier. Yeah. And the other great point he makes is it's just way easier at 25 and 35 and 45 than it is at 65, 75, and 85 to spend money in a way that brings more happiness to your life and that of those around you. It's just easier. You're better at it at 35. There are more ways you can do it at 35 than there are at 85. Sure. I spend all kinds of time trying to talk my parents into spending their money. They're 80 now. And you know what? They just don't have the energy or the health to jump on a plane, even a first class ticket, and go across the world and check out Bangkok. That chapter of their lives is gone.
Yep.
And, just like if you don't read to your kids when they're 7 years old, they don't want you to read to them when they're 17. You missed it. That chapter's gone. You cannot go back and have that experience. So recognize that there are chapters to your life and make sure you get the experiences that correspond to every chapter as you go along.
Absolutely. So last thing is like a new graduate, right? And you're trying to reach FIRE as you talk about financial independence, retire early. And that's been a big focus as soon as I graduated. But then, I realized I didn't go on a lot of those trips, What advice someone's coming out, and especially now it's harder and harder to open a practice. It's harder and harder to get into that financial independence strategy. How do they balance that when they read a book like Die with Zero and not, fall into a pit?
Well, I think you used the key word. The key word is balance. Right? Yeah. Because you are balancing two things. You are balancing the needs and wants of current you with the needs and wants of future you, who you think you know, but maybe you don't know as well as you think you do. Because you're probably going to be a little different than you think you're going to be when you're older. But you got to balance those two things. Like I talk to lots of people, because the natural thing people do is, they come out of training and they, and they grow into their income right away, and they feel like they deferred gratification for a decade. And the natural thing that most docs do is they just start spending it all, and then all of a sudden their student loans come due, and they're like, now I'm stretched. They're literally living paycheck to paycheck on $400,000 a year. It's appalling. It's ridiculous, right? So most of what I do is to help people avoid the natural thing, which is spending it all. Yeah. But there's a certain percentage of people, a certain subset of people that get that message early on and maybe dive into it a little bit too much and forget to spend some money as they go along. So it is a balance for sure. But the problem is you can't preach this, because the people who need to be saving more money, they hear, Die with Zero, I should spend more as I go along. And the people who are really good natural savers and really need to spend a little bit of money are like, when he says live like a resident, he means do it for my entire career. And so people take the wrong message from what I'm saying. And I hate that. I wish I could just get that moderation in all things. You got to balance it message across to everybody.
Chris has absolutely no idea about taking things too far or jumping all in on one thing. Right, Chris? How many pairs of Saks underwear do you have now? Or Bombas socks?
It's all the same, though, so I don't have to think about it. It's not a good idea. Right. Just get up, put it on. No, don't even have to think about it.
I was joking with, but I know with his wife the other day. We were all in a chat group together and talking about his Bombas socks. We all got Bombas socks. Are you a Bombas fan, Jim?
I don't have Bombas socks. Apparently, I'm missing out here.
You got Bombas socks. I know you do.
I don't have Bombas socks.
What kind of socks do you wear?
I don't even know what Bombas socks are.
Oh my gosh. The honeycomb, it's like the best engineered, most comfortable sock available on the market. They have sales every year. Yeah, you got to get these Bombas socks. At any rate, we were all convinced we all got Bombas socks. And Chris, Morgan says you have 1,000 pairs of these things.
I don't know about that much, but probably. Maybe. I weeded out my sock drawer and switched all the Bombas. So how do you go back? But then you don't have to think about what you're going to wear. It's the same color. You just put it on and go.
For those of you who didn't catch that, he said it really quick. They're all the same color. 1,000 pairs of the same color socks. So, I wanted to talk about the balance part. You mentioned that you want to get across all things in balance, but you can't say that message because a lot of people take it to the extreme. If you say you need to learn how to spend your money, they're going to spend too much money. If you say you need to save, they're going to save everything and not spend a dime. Are you a Dave Ramsey fan by chance?
Dave Ramsey is not perfect either, but right. I do think he's doing more good than harm.
I agree 100%. But I did notice that about Dave Ramsey's messaging. I was a big fan when I got out of residency. And then as I got a little bit older and more financially savvy, I started to recognize some of his advice just doesn't apply to me anymore. There's no nuance in there. And I think that for someone who is struggling with massive credit card debt, it works great. But if you already have wealth, I know you're not a big fan of taking on debt, but I think that there's a healthy amount of debt in certain areas that you should take. And he's like, pay down all debt as fast as you can. There's just no nuance there. So just touching on that in regards to having that balance and not taking things all the way, and then providing a message that resonates with the most people. So you're doing the most amount of good, even though it may not apply to everyone. And I think that comes into one of our favorite financial pundits, who is Morgan Housel. He says to know the game that you're playing. He used the example of Amazon stock. Do you remember that example? Where I don't remember the year, but it was priced around like $130 or something. And at that time, that was way overvalued for where it was at. And what was happening was a lot of short-term investors, like day traders, were pumping up the value of the stock. And they knew that if they bought it now, in a few hours, it's going to be higher. And that's when they were going to sell anyway. So it made sense. So if you were on that timeline, it could make sense to purchase Amazon stock even at that overvalued price. Likewise, if you're on a really long time horizon, if you have 30 years to be invested in the stock, clearly it's above 130 now. But if you were a midterm investor at that time, not understanding the game that others were playing that were pumping up the value, you could have bought at 130, and then when you sold, it would have been half of that. So I've thought, know the game you're playing. It comes down to where you're at with your wealth level. What is your biggest struggle? I think that also applies to our practices. And I think that one of the things I've always said is that when you are at a lecture or when you go to an office visit and you see this guy who is just killing it and you envy him, he's got this charisma and his staff love him, his employees love him, and you try to copy his systems, maybe not having the same level of charisma that this person has, all of your systems are going to hinge on the doctor being able to drive the show. And if you're not that person, you could fail pretty hard by trying to play the same game that this person is playing. There's numerous other examples where that could fit, but the point here is know the game you're playing in finances, in your practice. With this die with zero concept, I want to talk a little bit about how we spend our money now. You know, there is an idea that a lot of us have that once you get past a certain point of wealth, the goal is to buy back your time, to outsource that which you can delegate and use your time for something else. Maybe it's what you have a competitive advantage in, or maybe it's just, going out on the boat and wake surfing. What are your thoughts on delegation? Where is that inflection point at which you start buying your time back? Do you even agree with that philosophy in general?
Well, you covered a lot of ground that I'd love to comment on. Let's start with the question you asked, which is, when should you start buying your time back? Well, earlier than most people think, right? Time is valuable. It's very valuable for docs, right? You can turn your time into money at a very high hourly rate. And so anything that costs you less than that hourly rate, you really ought to be outsourcing. You can make a very logical argument for outsourcing anything that costs you less than what you can earn, at least, after tax. Now, you're not going to work 150 hours a week by any means. And so obviously you can't turn all your time into money, but things like housekeeping, yard care, even things like buying a first-class ticket so you get off the plane sooner. There are all kinds of ways to use your money to buy time. And, one of the greatest time machines out there, which frankly is beyond the reach for most doctors, is to be flying private. I talked to lots of people that fly private or whatever, and they refer to it as a stupidly expensive time machine, but it buys them some time at a very high rate, unfortunately. So there's all kinds of ways that you can buy more time in your life. I think we just need to be conscious about it and recognize when it makes sense, when it doesn't make sense for us, and not be afraid to spend money to buy time. Now, a lot of times that's just hiring an employee. Is what it is. I've got 18 people working here at the White Coat Investor now, and a number of them are doing jobs that I know how to do. Now, most of them are better at them than I was, to be honest, but I can do their job. But I bought time by hiring them to do it. And usually they do a better job than I ever did with it anyway. But the fact remains, there are lots of things we can do in our practices, in our home lives, in our personal lives, to buy time. And we ought to take advantage of those opportunities when it makes sense.
Absolutely.
Now, let's talk for just a second about debt, because this is all orthodontics is the whole audience for this podcast, right?
Absolutely.
I think we're the highest debt holders of any profession. Yeah,
for sure. Mm-hmm. Every time I run into a doc with $1 million plus in student loans, it's an orthodontist. Yeah. Every time. And, you come out and then a lot of physicians don't realize this is that you guys pay money to go to residency. Yeah. Physicians get paid to go to residency. That's not the case for orthodontists. Yeah. And so you end up with even more debt and more time that debt's compounding. And then you come out and you've got to start a practice, and that's usually some more debt. And if you want to ever buy a home, well, there's some more debt. And so you tend to be the most highly indebted of doctors. Now, your incomes are usually pretty darn close to the top as well. And so it's, a high income, high debt kind of proposition. But the issue with, Dave Ramsey style debt advice is there is no nuance. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a huge fan of debt. People know that. We paid off our debt in 2017 and haven't gone back to get any more. We don't miss it at all. And so I don't have a problem with people living debt free whatsoever. But more nuance needs to be injected into the discussion. Mm-hmm. Not borrowing money to start a practice that would triple your income is stupid. Yeah. Right. This idea, I listened to Dave Ramsey, a show not long ago where he congratulated somebody. I think it was an OBGYN. She paid off her $360,000 in student loans in 16 months. And he congratulated her on it. And then the next caller on the show was somebody who was wanting to go to medical school, thought they were going to have to borrow $200,000 or $300,000. And he told them not to. I'm like, you just celebrated somebody paying this off in 16 months. Yeah, why are you telling them not to borrow this? This is a good investment. Yeah. And so the lack of nuance bothers me. I think the best manual out there on how to use debt, because, the truth is that debt's not good for most people. The way most people use debt, it gets them in trouble. Let's be honest with it. That is the truth. But the best manual out there about how to use it is a series of books called The Value of Debt that I think is well worth reading. I think every orthodontist probably ought to read that book. And it talks about not only the kinds of debt to use, but how to use it, how much of it to have, what the ratio ought to be between your assets and your debts, which is basically something between 15% and 35%. Most of us are starting our career with way more debt than that. We got to get rid of some debt to get to that ratio. But the fact remains, right? The math is undeniable. If you can borrow at 3% and earn at 8%, yes, you're going to come out ahead. Mm-hmm. And any discussion of debt that doesn't acknowledge that up front, I think just lacks the nuance that ought to be in that discussion.
Hey Pearlers, did you know you can earn 15.75 CE credits by watching 20 of the best speakers in orthodontics from the comfort of your home or during a slow part of your morning in the orthodontic clinic? I'm here to tell you that you can earn all of the CE with none of the travel by logging into orthodonticpearls.org and choosing the virtual ticket for the Mother of Pearls Conference coming this October 10th through 11th, held at the Kennedy Space Center. We will be live streaming the entire show, plus giving access to download all the presentations to watch anytime you want forever. And yes, even if you don't join us live, you can still earn the CE credits by entering the code we will announce at the end of each presentation on those recorded videos forever. You won't want to miss incredible mastermind pearls from the Braces guy, Dr. Grant Collins, on how to revolutionize your team culture and deal with tough interpersonal challenges without breaking a sweat. I'll be presenting on mandibular advancement with clear aligners and 20 applications of integrated clear aligner buttons, as well as my top 5 practice growth pearls. And there are plenty of other speakers such as Dr. Brian Anderson and so many more. Each presentation is highly concentrated to deliver actionable pearls. There's no program like it on the planet. So be sure to log in and reserve your virtual ticket to the 7th Annual Orthodontic Pearls Conference at orthodonticpearls.org today.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Jim. And, one of the decisions that I made, we refinanced my student loans early on. In fact, the way we did that is my dad mortgaged his house, and it was like a sub 3% interest rate. He got it right at the trough of the interest rates. So there's a little bit more risk that's carried with that. So I had to take out a life insurance policy just in case.
Nice work. Nice work. Most people don't go that far, right? They don't go that far and think about that stuff, but it's super important that you covered him for that risk.
Exactly. I mean, the student loans, they're not dischargeable in a bankruptcy, but they are dischargeable in the in the event of death, but this would not be. It's in my dad's name. So yeah, I don't want to wreck his retirement because he did me a solid. But at any rate, we got that interest rate down below 3%, and I ended up stretching the payments out to 15 years instead of 10, because it just made sense to me. And I'm so glad I did that now, because that gives me so much more free capital to invest in things like the practice. I'm not pinching pennies around my marketing expense, for example. It has offered me opportunity to invest in the stock market during that time, which has far exceeded 3% over that same time horizon. So Chris and I have a little bit of friction on this point, but I think that leverage safe debt is a great way to build wealth, especially if you can get that interest rate really, really low. I'm going to come back to this. We're not going to get into this right now, but we will be coming back to the car loan concept, because I know that was in your article, and I want to talk about how that might apply here too. But we're going to get to that. I want to start with some of the things that we agree on. So, Jim, you wrote an article on your most controversial opinions, and I just wanted to highlight a few of those things. First of all, the ones that we absolutely agree on: get out of California. Okay.
I don't want all docs to leave California. There's a lot of people in California I care a great deal about. They need dentists, they need physicians. Please don't everybody leave California.
Don't
but
try to walk
let's
it
be
back
honest.
Now. No, you got to stand by your opinion, man. All right. Well, I've said this
financially.
It's
not a great place to live if you're a doc. Let's be honest.
Well, I agree with that. I did my dental school in California, and I got a taste of that. And I think that especially you mentioned, the tax brackets. You mentioned the cost of living. Even the competition for medicine and certainly dentistry is challenging in a place where everyone wants to live, and the cost of living is so high. What's not mentioned there is how it drags on your time as well. So we've already talked about the notion of trading your money for time, but it's well known economics is about allocation of resources, and when you can't allocate by money, you allocate by time or some other inconvenience. And I feel like with California, it's so saturated with people that you kind of give up both. Cost of living goes up, but also you're sitting in traffic forever. There's just congestion at every level. Bureaucracy has a lot to do with that too. So again, I'm with you with California. I think I moved out of California. Don't buy a house during residency. I think this is one where there might be a little bit more nuance. So first of all, I agree with you. When I was in residency, I looked at the factors, and they had a break-even point, where renting versus a mortgage. At what point are you going to break even on it? And a lot of those time horizons were about 4 to 5 years for break even. And for an orthodontist, certainly our residency is shorter than that. So clearly it doesn't make sense if you're planning on selling at the end. But, room for nuance. Let's say that you're going to keep that house as an investment vehicle after you leave, and then you rent it out. With a longer time horizon, surely that could be a good investment, and maybe even one that you should consider. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, a lot of times we leave the city we did our residency in. We go somewhere else, and then you become a long-distance landlord. And I'll tell you, one of the hardest things in real estate investing is being a long-distance landlord. It's just hard. You end up having to hire more out. You end up having, a lot of problems that you don't have when you live where your investments are. So that's one issue. But the bigger issue is we don't buy properties the same way when we're going to live in them as when they're just an investment for us. And so I think that is a justification most people use because they just want to buy a house. Well, if you just want to buy a house, go buy the house. The truth is your income increase after you finish residency is probably going to save you from the money you lose by doing this. And you don't always lose money, right? The last few years, housing's gone through the roof, right? And so even people that only owned for 3 years, they made money. It's possible to do that. I would say historically, you make money about a third of the time in a 3-year residency and about half the time in a 5-year residency.
Interesting.
And so it's not impossible to make money while owning a home just for a short period of time, but most of the time you lose money. It's a relatively small amount of money, though, compared to your future income. So I kind of given up trying to talk residents out of buying homes. I can't really do it anyway. They're going to do it. And, as money mistakes go for docs, this is not a big one. right?
Yeah.
It's a relatively small one, and it's not that big of a deal. So, this is not a hill I'm going to die on.
All right, I'm a little disappointed, but I do appreciate the nuance there. All right, here's another one that we agree on. Live like a resident. We see this come up in the forums all the time, and I like your idea of the 50% pay bump, because at the end of residency, we've all been through it. We're haggard. We've been working our butts off, and very little financial reward. I remember, sneaking little bottles of vodka into the club because I couldn't afford to buy something at the bar. Bottle of vodka in one pocket, bottle of Mio in the other. Tell them you're the DD, get a water, mix it all up, and you got a free drink. All my co-residents were doing that by the end of our residency. New York City, man, it was like $18 drinks even back then.
Wasn't there a time that you put like pancakes in your pocket or something like that?
Okay, that's a different story. It was not pancakes. No,
are we going back to the pearls section? It feels like we're back in the pearls section.
Right. I apologize. All right, we'll put that in the pearl section. But pancakes, no, there were no pancakes in my pocket. But that's a different story. We can reference the Mother's Day episode for that one. Jenny sold me out on our little hotel visit when I couldn't afford the buffet. At any rate. So anyway, I think that after so many years of deprivation, it's nice to reward yourself. But Chris and I have talked about this, and I say, like, there's a lot of people who just live to the edge of their means. Whatever I can afford, I'm gonna spend that. And what I recognize, partially from listening to podcasts like yours, is that I don't get any more enjoyment out of McLaren versus a Camry when I first graduated. I was just happy to have a car. I'd gone through 3 years in New York City where I could not have a car. And just the luxury of driving that beat up Camry to the grocery store, putting groceries in my trunk, and then driving back, not having to hump that stuff through the subway in 3 different transfers, was just such a luxury that I just felt so satisfied, so happy. I go back to my 900 square foot apartment, which was 3 times what I had in New York City, and also cost a third of the rent. And I was just like, I felt like I was living like a king. Now, I could have afforded more. I could have spent more money on a bigger house or a nicer car, but I don't think I would have gotten any more enjoyment out of that. So that differential, that arbitrage, I'm able to invest and let that grow until the point where that Camry is no longer suiting me. And I got there, and then you have to upgrade that car. You have to upgrade the house, but you're always living slightly below your means. So I'm saying, instead of living to the edge of your means, live to your edge of satisfaction. What are your thoughts on that concept?
Well, having driven both a McLaren and a Camry.
You've driven a McLaren?
I have. We rented one about a year ago for our 25th wedding anniversary for a couple of days.
How fun.
It was really fun for 2 days.
Yeah.
The problems with the McLaren is there's nowhere to put anything. Like the trunk, which is in the front, is literally the size of a carry-on bag. That's all you can put in there.
Yeah.
And the seats aren't super comfortable for a long period of time either. I got stuck in traffic on the way to Park City for a couple of hours, and there was a wreck or something, and my back was killing me by the time I got to Park City. But it's pretty fun. And the amazing thing, though, is during those 2 days that I drove that McLaren, is how many people asked me what I did for a living, which was fascinating to me. And how many people connected this ostentatious external show of wealth to me actually being wealthy. I wasn't any more wealthy driving my F-250 around than I am that McLaren. But boy, did people assume I was, which was very interesting to me. But live like a resident is just an acknowledgement of a couple of things. The first one is that your greatest wealth building tool as a high income professional is your income.
Yes.
And you've got to harness that income if you want to be wealthy. You've got to turn that high income into a high net worth. Net worth is everything you own minus everything you owe. It is the measurement of wealth. Your income is not your wealth. And that's a really important concept for people to get. The second thing live like a resident is, and this is supposed to be, it's a temporary period of 2 to 5 years at the beginning of your career where you spend much less than you could in order to pay off debt, build wealth, essentially. It is an acknowledgement that this is the easiest time in your career to do that. before you're used to all that money, before you have the big fancy house, before you have all these kids, with a million activities as teenagers, before your tastes have gone up, while you're still willing to carry a little bottle of vodka into the club and pancakes in your pocket into the buffet.
For the record, I'm still willing to do that.
It's just an acknowledgement that this is easier at the beginning. Right? You're already used to living on a resident kind of income. So try to live something similar to that for a couple of years while you knock out some debt and put some savings away and get a good head start on putting something together for future you.
Absolutely.
And then grow into most of your income. My general guideline for docs is save 20% of your gross for retirement. But if you can save more than that or use some additional money to pay off debt in the first few years of your career, I've yet to meet somebody that really regretted doing that.
Absolutely. I do want to finish up my segment with this car topic. We brought up the car line multiple times now. And, I think that the Tesla twins over here are definitely going to agree with me. They have some fancy cars. Brian's got 2 of them. Chris has got 3 cars, all much
Tesla.
more than he needs. Jim, I think you should take him behind the woodshed after this. But at any rate, I'm gonna say this. Like in your article there, you say don't finance a car. That's specifically what you say, and you do acknowledge the pushback to that, which could be that sub 3% interest rate. Lock that in and maybe arbitrage the rest. We already established for a student loan at 3%. Pay that off slowly, or a mortgage at 3%. Pay that off slowly and invest the rest.
The key on that, of course, is the hard part, which is invest the rest.
Yeah.
It's not that the math is wrong. It's that our behavior isn't what we expect it to be. We don't invest the rest. We go buy something else with it. That's the issue with that technique.
So I guess my question on that particular part, and there is more I want to cover on the car, so we're not off the hook yet, but
I'm looking forward to the car discussion.
with the interest rate specifically, why would you be an advocate for a mortgage at 3% and invest the rest, but you don't think that would apply to a car loan at 3% and invest the rest?
Well, I think it applies to the car loan as well. It also applies to a loan on your vacuum cleaner and a credit card loan used to buy a pack of gum. It's all the same, right? But at a certain point, you got to go, this is silly to arbitrage a $100 loan. And I hope you get to the place in your life where it's just as silly to arbitrage a $30,000 auto loan or a $300,000 mortgage. That it's just not moving the needle for you. Because you're like, oh, that's not going to make a big difference in how much wealth I have in the end. This is silly. Why am I borrowing all this money to try to get rich when, I've already got 10 times as much as I've got debt, So that's my thoughts on it. Yeah. I think a lot of us tend to play these sorts of games with debt relatively early in our wealth building process. And after a while, we're like, this is silly. I'm just going to pay this off.
I mean, simplicity wise, it's definitely easier not to think about that. To clarify then, is it more a matter of scale? Like a $500,000 home, that's something that might make sense to arbitrage? Or is it because you see the home as a need, whereas the car is more like a fancy vacuum cleaner? It's more of a want.
This is more a discussion of the merits of debt, right? If you can't get enough debt that it's going to move the needle, and the author of The Value of Debt would argue that's 15% of your assets. If you can't borrow 15% of what your assets were, this probably isn't even worth doing.
Got it.
And then he would argue if you have more than 35% of what your assets are, you're probably taking on too much leverage risk. That's what he would argue as far as debt. Now, of course, whatever debt you have, you want it to be the most attractive debt possible, right? Low interest rates, non-callable, right? Fixed interest rates. You want it to be attractive debt, long-term rather than due next month. You want the most attractive debt you can have, but you also only want to have a certain amount of it. And beyond that, it doesn't make sense, right? For example, if I offered you a, $50 million loan, right? Would you take that out? Well, no. Something, tiny little hiccup in my life happened. All of a sudden, now I'd have to service this $50 million loan. And so you realize, there's an amount issue too with the debt. But this is all totally different from my bizarre, non-logical stance on cars, which we can get to as well.
You're already admitting it's non-logical. Dang, that takes all the joy out of this. But all right, well then here's my main thing about the car is that you say in the article by foregoing the car, you can buy something that you want instead. Whether it's a finance car, whether you pay cash, you say, oh, spending $80,000 or $100,000 on a car is stupid. Go buy something you want instead. I mean, certainly the implication there is that the car is pure utility. But as these guys are going to attest to, I mean, as soon as both of them, when they got their Teslas, they're so excited to take it out and put it into plaid mode and like feel that roller coaster effect. And sure, there's a good argument that wears off, but I think some of it wears off, some of it stays. I'm going to admit to you, Jim, you're going to lose a lot of respect for me for this, but I actually lease a BMW, and I trade it in every 3 years, and I get the next new thing. And I'll say this. I've been doing that for probably 5 years now. So coming up on my third one, but every day I get into that car, it's a pleasure to drive. And that feeling has not gone away. Like, sure, I'm not putting it into the sport mode and doing all the crazy stuff, on the freeway anymore, but it's a real enjoyment for me. And the way that I make these decisions is, first of all, it's partially tax deductible because I can write off a portion of that through the business. So I figure if I'm going to invest in a luxury, why not have the government subsidize that? Secondly, I think about what could I buy with that money that I'm spending on this that would make me happier than this car. And also that I could not afford if I did get the car. And I can't think of anything with that incremental money. If I had an extra $100,000 in my pocket right now, I can't think of how I'd want to spend that money that would make me happier. And that does include retirement. I'm still putting away above 20% of my income towards my retirement accounts or investment vehicles, non-retirement. So I feel pretty good about that. What do you think about that? It sounds like your argument hinges on the idea that foregoing the car is going to get you something that you want because the car is just a utility. But is there a room for that nuance that the car is a genuine investment in your joy?
Well, I think we got to take a little bit of background information here and acknowledge a few things when it comes to cars and when it comes to doctors. Okay. Most people in America are not millionaires. And they are not millionaires because of what is sitting in their driveway. Okay. Actual, reasonably safe, reasonably reliable transportation is not that expensive. You can get that with a $5,000 to $10,000 car. Mm-hmm. So from a logical argument, it makes no sense to really ever have a car loan that's 5 figures. It doesn't make any sense logically at all. So let's acknowledge that first of all. The difference between a more expensive car and a less expensive car and how it's owned might be $5,000 a year. And if you invest $5,000 a year at 8% for 30 years, that's $1 million. Mm-hmm. So the reason most Americans are not millionaires is literally sitting in their driveway. So I think we got to acknowledge that. That's just math. Mm-hmm. The other thing we got to acknowledge is that doctors make enough money that they can screw up a fair amount of it pretty well. And when I say screw up, I mean not optimize. Right. Yeah, they don't have to make every single decision, perfectly optimized financially to be financially successful. Right. Mm-hmm. If you're putting away 20% of your gross toward retirement, it really doesn't matter what you do with the rest of it. Mm-hmm. Right. I don't care if you go to Italy and you walk around Venice with it. I don't care if you drive a McLaren with it. I don't care if you give it away to charity. I don't care if you spend it all on interest payments because you want to have a gazillion dollars in debt. Whatever. You can do whatever you want with the rest. And you're still going to be okay because you're a doctor and you make $2 or $3 or $5 or $800,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And so let's acknowledge that too, because that's also a fact. And I think any discussion about cars has got to recognize those two things. Now, down in my garage, immediately below this recording studio, there are 3 vehicles. Okay, one of which is the vehicle my wife drives. It's a 2016 Toyota Sequoia. We paid cash for it, brand new. It was $60,000. We bought it because we thought my Sequoia was not going to live much longer. Right? I had one just like it from 2005 that we bought a few years old. and basically drove into the ground. It lived for a long time afterward, another 7 or 8 years. I think it had nearly 280,000 miles when it was really no longer reliable, and I sold it for a couple of $1,000s. And then I replaced it with a brand new truck. The truck I have down there that I drive around is probably a $92,000, $94,000 truck, right? It's a big Super Duty with everything on it. I even have stuff I wanted to put on it that I couldn't because they couldn't get it from the factory, right? I wanted to have massaging seats, and it is not even close to that basic level of reasonably reliable, reasonably safe $5,000 to $10,000 transportation item. Not even close, right? I spent almost that much on the bed cover, right? It's just, it's ridiculous. So I'm not going to tell people they can't drive what they want. When you can afford something and you want to drive something nice, go get something nice. The whole point of managing your money well is so you can spend it on stuff you care about. You know, if not now, then later. Some balance between current you and future you. One of the easiest ways to be able to tell that you can afford something, though, is that you can just write a check for it. You know, when you can write a check for it, you know you can afford it. Now, some people might argue, well, I can make the payments for it. It's a very tiny percentage of my income. But I knew I could afford that truck because I wrote a check for whatever it was, $92,000 for this truck. I knew I could afford it. I had the money in my checking account. And I think that's the mindset that people need to have to really build wealth well, is to go, can I write this check? Yes, I can write this check. Now, if you're at that stage of life where you're like, man, I can get this loan at 2% and, you know, some leverage risk still makes sense to me. I'm not yet financially independent and I'm trying to keep my debt at that 15 to 35% rate. And this is relatively long-term, low interest rate fixed debt. Well, maybe this is part of that debt that I'm carrying. Okay, fine. Right. But let's be honest, right? What's a lease? A lease is a 3-year rental agreement. It's a rental agreement. You're renting a car, right? How long do you have to rent a car for before it makes sense to buy it? Well, a few months.
I'm not trying to defend a lease.
A few months is when it becomes logical to do this. But that said, you know, if you're putting 20% away to build wealth, pay off debt, whatever, you know, and you can afford to have the BMW, go get it. But at the point where you're like not interested in putting it in sport mode, you got to ask yourself, does this really still make sense for me? You know? Because Teslas are fun to drive. I make fun of Teslas all the time. They are fun. They are fun. And I looked at when they were trying to come up with a Plaid Plus. I don't even know if Plaid Plus is out yet, but I was like, maybe that's the one. That's when I get the Tesla. I mean, the garage when we did the renovation is all wired for, you know, electric chargers down there.
Jim, you drive such a manly car. Please, just don't do it. Have you seen you've seen Brian's Cybertruck? Are you honestly going to trade in your beautiful piece of Americana for that monstrosity?
No, I'd buy both. I'd buy both.
That's the biggest part. You both still have
from
to
the White
drive.
Coast investor himself.
You still have to actually
drive.
I
mean, keep in mind, right? When I'm giving people advice on how to build wealth, that's different from advice on how to be wealthy. Right? They're different pieces of advice, you know? And sometimes they need to hear live like a resident. And sometimes they need to hear die with zero. And the wrong people get the wrong message.
We are so excited to announce that the 8th annual Orthodontic Pearls Conference will be held at the Talking Stick Resort and Casino in Scottsdale, Arizona from November 6th through the 7th. Yes, if you have any kids, they'll know all about 6-7, so you can't forget the dates. It will also be a rock music theme, so you and your team can bring out your inner Freddie Mercury, Steve Perry, Jimmy Page, Slash, and so many more while learning from the best speakers in orthodontics. It's going to be a total blast. Early bird tickets go on sale now until October 10th for $500 off doctor tickets and $200 off team member tickets. We are the last remaining large independent orthodontic meeting run by orthodontists for orthodontists. You can earn 15 or more CE credits, view 50 exhibits, connect with over 500 colleagues, and enjoy an incredible social event we have planned for you with live music from the world's only all-orthodontist band, Relapse. We have both live and virtual options where you can earn CE credit either way. Be sure to reserve your ticket at orthodonticpearls.org/MOPC-2026 today. That's orthodonticpearls.org/MOPC-2026. We hope to see you there.
I was just going to say, that's one thing I've noticed. You know, I'm listening to these conversations and I'm trying to pull out patterns. And one thing that I found in our discussions is that messages are targeted to specific people, and you have to know your audience, and they have to know who they are and what message is for them, because there are very few universal messages out there, very few. And those messages are generally very simple. Like, the more simple, the better. And of course, we're talking about something abstract, wealth. I mean, what does that even mean? You can define that in so many different ways, and people do. They define it, well, I'm wealthy in terms of my health. I'm wealthy in terms of my relations. I'm wealthy in terms of my time. I'm wealthy in terms of my autonomy. I'm spiritually wealthy, whatever. So I think we just have to always remember that these are nuanced topics. I mean, you mentioned, Daiwa Zero, you mentioned Dave Ramsey, and Jim, I noticed that you said essentially, and even some of your own advice, it's like, well, it depends where you are. It depends who you are. And you just mentioned that the wrong people take the wrong message. Isn't that human nature? I mean, that is human nature to hear the thing and double down on exactly what you don't need to double down on.
You hear what
right?
Or
the savers that are just addicted to saving because they're so afraid of letting go. They get so much security in amassing and consuming and safety and this illusion. And it's an illusion. Yeah. I mean, to a degree. Again, this is all nuanced. It's an illusion and it's not. There's real power and there's no power, right? It's holding these things together. But I think that's so interesting. And, I find myself constantly asking myself this, why can't we get that? Why can't we get that political discussions, religious discussions, monetary discussions, fiscal discussions, economic, these are such abstract concepts that it really matters where you stand and what matters to you, your values. And that's the place you're going to advocate for. And so to think that anything is universally right or universally wrong, again, very few universals, and those are very, very simple. I'm just curious what your guys' thoughts are on that.
Even more interesting is you can kind of have, two seemingly opposing ideas at the same time. Like I didn't mention the other car downstairs in the garage, right? We got this 2016 Sequoia, we got this 2023 F-250, and there's a 2009 Civic down there too, right? This is the car that my son drives over to the high school and back a few miles, right? It's a stick shift. There's nothing special about it. It's got 100 and gazillion miles on it. The bumper falls off if he stops too hard. It's a beater. It's a beater. And the lesson I want my kids to learn by driving a beater is that you're not what you drive. Right. So at the same time, I've got a $90,000 truck down there. I've got whatever that Civic's worth now, $2,000 or $3,000 down there, teaching a totally different lesson. And I think that's the way it is with a lot of things, both in finances and in life, that we're doing two totally seemingly opposing things at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's important to always be intentional. Right. So you're very intentional about the message that you want your son to learn. And whether he learns that or not, of course, is up to him. But you know what you think is right for him in your stewardship, right? You have the responsibility. Well, I'm responsible to try and give him some wisdom, whatever wisdom we have, as parents. And I think in the end, it's a healthy relationship to then let go to some degree, whether they're going to learn that or not. Right. Whether even hosting this podcast, it's like, hey, well, we might have aims, we might have goals, we might hope that listeners will learn this or learn that or see this or see that. But ultimately, it does come down to people choosing to see the message, choosing to understand. I think a lot of that is our willingness to let something be done unto us. Let it be done. So that's interesting. Another thing I noticed that came up several times is money is time. And I've noticed in my life, and it waxes and wanes. Andy, this is going to be a shock to you that sometimes I'm really organized and sometimes I'm not in terms of planning. And I'm learning to be more consistent and more disciplined. Another topic that came up here was do your future self a favor. That's something I actually tell my patients a lot of times. I'll say, hey, listen, an overbite generally is not painful. It's asymptomatic and usually is functional. Like, can you chew your food okay? Yeah, I chew my food. Of course, because you've adapted, you've accommodated. Like the body is amazing at adapting. But the problem here is this malocclusion is a chronic problem. This is going to result in long-term enamel loss or whatever issues that cause periodontal issues, etc. I'll say so. You may not understand the need for this bite correction now. I sure didn't when I was your age. When I was 13, I didn't understand, why do I need to fix my bite? He keeps saying I need to do these rubber bands. And the only reason I did my rubber bands is because I believed if you wear these, you'll get your braces off earlier, right? But I didn't see the value in it. So I tell my patients, hey, do your future self a favor. You probably don't value fixing this malocclusion right now because it doesn't feel urgent, because it's not painful and you chew fine. But guess what? Your future self will. So I think that's an interesting concept to view money as time, to be intentional about scheduling your time out. I found that when I've done that, I view it as precious. Like, oh gosh, I'm pretty booked tomorrow. So like, if I want to do something for me or I want to build something in here, I've got to be very intentional about it. So I think that's our most precious commodity is time, especially if you have a degree of wealth, a degree of financial freedom. And as you said, Jim, I mean, fortunately and sadly, depending on what way you want to look at it, we have the luxury to be able to do that. And I feel blessed, and I wouldn't want to be the other way. But it does raise in my mind, this idea of how attached are we to money, which we'll talk about. I want to get into that. But anyway, I thought those were just great thoughts that came up from everybody here. And the last thing is, you mentioned, Jim, on your advice about stocks, you said, just own all of them. And of course, talking about the lack of nuance and different, and Andy, you mentioned lack of nuance, and Dave Ramsey. So it comes back to this concept of wholeness. Like when we can accept the whole, like the ups and the downs, when we realize, like, hey, I'm diversified enough in the market, for example, that if something's down, hey, guess what? Something else is up. If we can apply that to life and in your practice, like, hey, one thing might be down, but gosh, if we're so invested emotionally in that thing and we're not involved enough in these other things, like we're not seeing the other good things that are happening in our life, we're not diversified enough. So I think if you can take the wholeness, own all of them, this own all of them concept, like, hey, I'm going to own the bad stuff that happens. And Jim, we'll talk about that. I know you had an accident about a year ago that was a pretty serious accident. We talked about that when we were both recovering. I had broken my leg. And for me, that was a big deal. I was hobbling around on a peg leg, and you were all banged up and you had a real scare. But at any rate, I think these are important concepts, and I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on these.
A few thoughts I had as you were talking about, this concept of wholeness is just how critical it is to look at all aspects together. We have a certain amount of limited resources in our lives. For most of us, for some portion of our life, money is one of those things. And if we manage it well, especially high income earners like we are, if we manage it well, there will probably come a time in our life when that is basically an unlimited resource to us. But there are other resources, right? There is time and energy and motivation, and you've only got so much. You can only use so much money to buy time, and then that's it. You only get so much. You can't buy an unlimited amount of it. But the same way with your health, with your energy, with your motivation, you've only got so much of it, and you've got to be a wise steward of all of those resources and use them in a way that's going to bring you as much happiness as you can find and to do as much good in the world and further what purpose you have in life as much as you can.
Yeah, thank you. I think being intentional, I've found a lot of peace, a lot of, I would say, even power in being more intentional in my life. Well, so Jim, I want to move into kind of more of a philosophical or spiritual arena and how money fits in with that, because of course we live in the system, right? And yet we're taught philosophically, religiously, that we kind of have to be outside of the system, that being in the system is not a great place to be. And yet we have to be in the system, right? We can't be total outsiders. So we hear a lot about abundance and scarcity. Over the last 10, 15, 20 years, I feel like there's been a lot of talk about abundance mindset, scarcity mindset. I think essentially behind those are optimism for abundance and fear for scarcity. I read a book by Brene Brown called Daring Greatly, and in that book, she says something to the effect that scarcity is the great lie, that the first waking thought of every day is about not having enough of something, whether that's time, money, love, energy, you mentioned it, health, that type of thing. And she said, interestingly, the opposite of scarcity is not abundance. She said, abundance and scarcity are like two sides of the same coin, actually. But she said the opposite of scarcity is enough. And she describes enough as wholeheartedness, facing uncertainty, being vulnerable, having exposure, and just knowing, but hey, it's okay, I'm enough. So even in there's this idea of wholeness. I may not have it all. There might be some downs, but you know what? There's some ups too. And I'm grateful for it all. So my question for you, Jim, is how do you define enough? Not just financially, but in life. And how has your view of enough changed over time? Even, considering like after your accident, because when we talked, you said that maybe you shouldn't even be alive. It was that serious of a fall.
Yeah, well, just to give people that haven't heard about this, if you're really interested in this, I put a 4-minute video on YouTube that summarizes the whole event. And then I had a couple of long podcasts where I interviewed some of my rescuers. But the short version of this little accident is I was leading a pitch of rock, vertical rock climbing on the north face of the Grand Teton. And I took a long leader fall. And it wasn't a clean fall. I bounced off some ledges and smashed my head on some ledges before my belayer caught me. And so when I finally came to a stop from this fall, I was hanging upside down on the rope, leaking blood and cerebrospinal fluid from my head. And I was unconscious and unresponsive. And so thanks to the efforts of my climbing partner, who's an emergency physician and longtime friend, as well as some very brave rescuers that came to us at the end of a rope dangling from a helicopter, as well as some great hospital staff, my life was not only saved, but I essentially made a full recovery. 2 helicopter flights, and 3 hours later, I was in a trauma center in Idaho and spent 4 days in the ICU before coming home and being nursed back to health by my dear wife. But so that's the long and the short of it. But as far as enough goes, I think it's good. Let's start with the financial description of enough and then extrapolate from there to the rest of life. Because enough is a concept, that is totally lost on people financially. There are a lot of people out there who are good savers, good investors, good business people who never come to an understanding of enough, right? And enough money is money such that you never need to earn another cent to live your desired lifestyle the rest of your life. And there is a number on that. And the problem with us as humans is we always think that number is 50% more than we currently have, right? And that's not the case. At a certain point, we hit that number, exceed that number. And when we've done that, we ought to be thinking about our responsibility to the world and those around us as far as what we do with that amount beyond enough. Just as a general guideline, people have never explored this at all. Financial independence is generally defined as having about 25 times what you spend in a year. So if you spend $100,000 a year, that's about $2.5 million. $200,000 a year, it's about $5 million. $300,000 a year, it's about $7.5 million. That's enough. If you have that, adjusted for inflation as you go throughout the rest of your life, there's a very low likelihood that you're ever going to run out of money. And so understanding how much enough is and actually changing the way you're living your life financially as you approach and achieve enough pays incredible dividends, right? When you have enough money, you should only be doing the work that you love that really aligns with your life's purpose. You shouldn't ever be doing work just for the money at that point. So I think that's a really important concept to understand financially. Once you get beyond finances and you're like, well, can I apply this to the rest of my life, right? How much time with my children is enough? How much, how many activities with my spouse is enough? How much time doing my favorite recreational pursuits is enough? How much health is enough health for me to achieve what I hope to achieve in my life? And this gets, this is down Brian's, this is in Brian's ballpark for sure, right? This gets very philosophical very quickly and makes me start having an existential crisis. But, it's awesome to explore and to really think about what does enough really mean in your life?
Hey Pearlers, did you know you can earn 15.75 CE credits by watching 20 of the best speakers in orthodontics from the comfort of your home or during a slow part of your morning in the orthodontic clinic? I'm here to tell you that you can earn all of the CE with none of the travel by logging into orthodonticpearls.org and choosing the virtual ticket for the Mother of Pearls Conference coming this October 10th through 11th, held at the Kennedy Space Center. We will be live streaming the entire show, plus giving access to download all the presentations to watch anytime you want forever. And yes, even if you don't join us live, you can still earn the CE credits by entering the code we will announce at the end of each presentation on those recorded videos forever. You won't want to miss incredible mastermind pearls from the Braces guy, Dr. Grant Collins, on how to revolutionize your team culture and deal with tough interpersonal challenges without breaking a sweat. I'll be presenting on mandibular advancement with clear aligners and 20 applications of integrated clear aligner buttons, as well as my top 5 practice growth pearls. And there are plenty of other speakers such as Dr. Brian Anderson and so many more. Each presentation is highly concentrated to deliver actionable pearls. There's no program like it on the planet. So be sure to log in and reserve your virtual ticket to the 7th Annual Orthodontic Pearls Conference at orthodonticpearls.org today.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And it is so individual. And of course, you mentioned it's subjective. It's whatever we think our lifestyle should be, right? And so I think as Americans, what we have to ask ourselves, and I'm talking to myself here. I mean, I am preaching to myself that we have to really evaluate what is our attachment to money and can we live with less, right? Can we live with less? So I was divorced about 5 years ago, and of course, it's been a difficult experience and it's been a great learning experience. But financially, I won't get into it too much, but I feel like I was clobbered financially in the court systems where we had marital estate valuation done by a court-appointed, a professional to value the marital estate, and my ex got significantly more than 50% of the marital estate at the time of divorce. And we won't get into the details on that. Of course, I didn't think it was just or fair. At first, I felt so angry about it. I felt so upset about it, so resentful about it. And for me, it was, I have to acknowledge, as growing up relatively privileged. I'm a white guy. I grew up in a higher socioeconomic status. I had access to education. Nothing in my life had ever really gone terribly wrong up until that point in my life. And I was a little bit naive. And I had to really question my attachment to even the principle of justice. But I thought it was money at first because I was so upset about it. I thought I was so upset. This isn't right. It's not fair. And then I realized, no, it's actually my attachment to justice. I'm too attached to justice that I'm going to be resentful unless I can learn to just accept that this is the way that it is. I exhausted my opportunities and at some point I just decided to settle. Okay, well, I don't want to fight this anymore. It's not worth it. Speaking of time, speaking of resources, energy, mindset, psychological health. No, I knew myself well enough to know where I could afford to cut my losses, so to speak. So I think it's really important to know yourself, to know what you can afford, whether that's psychologically, financially, relating to health, et cetera. But it's interesting. I had to really question, my attachments there. And as Americans, I think we really struggle with having less. You talk about having an old car, and Andy, of course, you lease a new car every few years. Well, I had my car, I had to put my car in the shop a few years ago, and they gave me a Nissan Altima, and I turned in my Tesla Plaid to have some work done or something like that. Nissan Altima, and Tesla was taking forever. As Chris, you know how it's so bad. It's so bad. They're sort of the worst. And listen, I got to kind of join with you guys. They kind of are the worst in some things. But at any rate, I was driving this Nissan Altima. And I thought, you know what? This is totally fine. And that was liberating for me because I thought, I totally could live with less and be happy. Why? Because I have what matters. I have relationships that matter. I have enough. I've got a nice house. It's not a mansion, but it's enough. I don't need anything bigger. I don't need anything fancier. I've got great kids. I've got relative health. So I think these are important things to keep in mind. I do want to ask you a question, just a sort of a philosophical, religious, spiritual question, Jim, about capitalism, markets, private property, even the family unit in terms of, amassing wealth and then passing it down, right? I heard this story of a cartoon where there's an altar, and on top of the altar is this golden, sculpted dollar bill. And it's somewhere in America. There are a bunch of these Americans that are bowing down to the dollar bill. And there's this one guy, and he's prostrate, and he's kind of leaning over to this next guy, his neighbor, who's also prostrate, bowing down to the dollar bill. And he says, well, at least we can say our religion isn't hypocritical. And I think that's sort of a scathing rebuke on America. And I kind of think oof, yeah, I definitely can reduce my attachments to the luxuries that we live in. But I'm curious, what moral or philosophical framework do you use to evaluate how well a financial or economic system is serving people? And what do you do for your family? How do you view this?
Yeah, the problem with capitalism is it's a little bit like democracy that way, right? Or whatever you want to call our, representative system of government. It's the worst system out there, except everything else we've already tried, right? It's got lots of problems. Capitalism has problems, but it also works very well for building wealth for people at all levels of the socioeconomic system. If you look at the wealth we enjoy now, and let's just compare it to 200 years ago in this country, right? 200 years ago, no message ever moved faster than the speed at which a horse could run. No person ever moved faster than the speed of a horse, right? I mean, it's remarkable the amount of wealth we all enjoy, even those that we think about being in the lower socioeconomic classes today, right? You have the world's repository of knowledge sitting in a $1,200 computer in your pocket, right? It's incredible what we enjoy by comparison. And in a lot of respects, what brought that? Was it, communism? Well, no, it was capitalism. So any discussion of the problems of capitalism needs to start with acknowledging what it has accomplished. And it has accomplished a great deal of wonderful good in our society. That said, it's obviously not equal, right? You don't have to look around at very many billionaires and a lot of people, starving and homeless and, not even being able to afford their own health care and all these other issues that we have and go, well, something ain't right here. The solution, however, I think is not nearly as easy to implement as we would all like it to be. It probably involves a lot of things. It probably involves some sort of progressive system of taxation. It probably involves some sort of private charitable giving. It involves all of us taking some responsibility for people around us. There are lots of things that need to be part of the solution to the ills that come with the benefits of capitalism. And so I don't know that I'd necessarily argue for a totally different economic system, but we definitely need to spend some time thinking about, how do we deal with the downsides of the system we have?
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think that goes in line with this idea of wholeness, that we have to learn how to accept the good and recognize the bad in our own selves, in our families, in our communities, in our churches, in our practices. We have to learn how to kind of hang in there and hold the tension between these different ideas. And I think too often, and sadly, our system right now is so prone to this polarity and division that we have a really hard time culturally holding opposites together. And we're really suffering because of it, because we too often can only see the negative or only see the positive. And I just wish that we as individuals could do a better job of recognizing about ourselves, again, about you apply it to whatever you want. Hey, there are some things that are going right here. There really are. And there's some things that are not going so well. And guess what? It does not matter what system you implement. It does not matter. There will always be opposites. I was in Europe this past summer, and I looked at some of the systems they have, and of course, comparing it and contrasting it with American culture. And there's some wonderful things. I think, wow, they do this so well. I mean, they really value, time with people, right? They're not slaves to work like we are in America. And yet, because their culture's been around much, much longer than ours, the good things have gotten, I would say, considerably better. And the bad things have also gotten considerably worse. And so as any system develops, I think the goods are going to kind of, get better, and the bads are going to kind of get worse. And so we're starting to see this in American culture where, this unequal distribution is happening. And I think that's always going to happen. It doesn't matter what system it is. I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are on that.
When you're touching on the polarity, I think that's an inevitability for one thing. I think that even if I've thought about this in our current structure, is that even if you were to get rid of the half of the country that disagrees with you on your topic, whoever's left over is then going to repolarize. They may not be as far to one side or the other, but it's going to repolarize. And then the moderates and the extremists are going to have the exact same tension. It'll just be over slightly different issues. As society progresses, interesting stat that I heard is that the denser a population is, the more they tend to want more government oversight. They tend to be a little bit more progressive in that sense. Whereas the more spread out a community is, the less population density you have, that tends to be more conservative or more, leave us to our own. And this kind of goes along with what you're saying with the way that societies progress and the way that they fall into the good getting better, the bad getting worse. Once you get above a certain population number, and I want to say it's around 500 people, don't quote me on that, I could look it up. But the point is that once you get above a certain level, you no longer know your neighbors. You no longer do things because it's Brian and I'm going to be cordial towards him. It becomes this mass of people, these faceless people that you don't care about, and you just hear about them through Facebook or on the news. You don't know these people personally. You don't care about them. And all you hear is whatever negative qualities they have, because frankly, our media is meant to divide and make us hate each other. So I think that with societies progressing, that density is part of that. You end up sacrificing more of your control towards oversight, and you're giving more power to people who are ultimately just people. And the more that goes on, the more the power falls into the people who are wrong to hold that power, which are the ones who seek it out. It's no longer a civic duty. It becomes, I want power for the sake of power. Not to get too far down this rabbit hole, but I think that our system allows for a binary choice. So we have to sort of force a bunch of nuanced opinions, a lot of diversity into one of two camps. And there's a temptation, a psychological temptation to apply the halo effect and say, because I agree on this one topic, which is the most important thing to me, then everything else that is believed here must also be right. And it's amazing to me as a centrist, to see the mental gymnastics that people go through in order to justify an ideology that is really, it's not a rational system that has been thought out. It's basically a conglomeration of interests that comes down to, we'll accept you under our tent because you're going to vote this way, and then we'll vote for your thing, you vote for ours. And that's how you get these, I'm not going to go into specifics, but I think if we look in the news, we see them all the time. There's contradictions within platforms, within ideologies that just make no sense, but somehow people justify them. It's much easier to see this on the other side, by the way. Like when you're on one camp, it's very easy to see the contradiction in the other side. It's much harder to focus on our own. So I think that what you're saying about society is progressing. I think the polarization does increase due to these forces. I think that corruption increases due to the type of people who are coming into power, and I think that when you're saying the good gets better, it's usually the winners of that system where the good is benefiting them. Like if you're at the top of America right now, holy cow, do you know the kind of lifestyle that Mark Zuckerberg is living right now, or that Jeff Bezos? I mean, he just had that he rented out, what was it, Amsterdam? What was the city he rented out? Does anyone remember? He rented out a city in Europe. Who does that? Who does that? Who rents out a city for their wedding? Amazing, unprecedented level of wealth, and at that level. At the same time, you have extreme poverty, and I'm not even talking the kind of poverty we have in the United States. I mean, you look at sub-Saharan Africa, and that's poverty. That's like real poverty, and that seems certainly not getting better. I don't know how much worse it's getting, but I think what you're saying about as society is progressing, the good getting better and the bad getting worse, it's really about distribution of resources. And certainly there's more to go around. I think that's the virtue of capitalism, is that there is a bigger pie. But it also creates this disparity that even if the worst is standing still, it's not actually getting worse. We don't judge by our absolute value. We judge by comparison. Okay. That's a flaw of the human mind, is that it's not about how good I'm doing. It's about how good am I doing compared to you and compared to what's in my line of sight. So I think that in a sense, the bad getting worse is more a matter of perspective. It's more a matter of contrast, because the good has gotten so much better that the bad may be standing still, but it looks so much worse knowing what else is out there.
For sure, there are, us moderates, politically speaking, feel very lonely these days. But you can't forget that a lot of that is driven by social media algorithms and the various perspectives of the news outlets from both sides. So, don't forget, most people are moderates. Don't get too depressed about that fact. Despite the fact that most of what you hear is coming from one extreme or another, most people are not that way, and you have to continually remind yourself of that fact that most people are very reasonable. But even in sub-Saharan Africa, right, the classic place that's considered poor in the world, it's a very diverse place. There are a lot of different countries in sub-Saharan Africa, of course, but even there, life is improving. Wealth is improving. Things are getting better. Disease is being stamped out and controlled. And yes, we still have hot spots of war throughout the globe. But in general, the history of the world is one continuous, triumph of the optimists. And so don't get too down about the problems we see in the world. As a general rule, things are gradually getting better and better and better. Yes, we've got the specter of nuclear war we've been dealing with for the last 75 years. But for the most part, life is getting better. Don't get too depressed about it. Put a smile on your face. Recognize that optimism is usually the way to not only invest, but to live your life.
And Jim, I have to agree with you there. I heard something the other day that we're all living better than Rockefeller. because they didn't have this information in their pocket. They didn't have self-driving cars. Another plug for Tesla. You got to check.
Air conditioning.
Mainly that side of it. Or air conditioning, all these great things that we have. We used to be so bored waiting in the line at the DMV for 3 hours. Now we have technology that tells you when it's your turn. You could be doing work while you're waiting. We are all so wealthy if we look at that.
You're living a life better than the kings.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Of even 100 years ago, much less 200 years ago. You are a king in the way you live. You're eating food from all over the world that's delivered to you. At your doorstep for trivial expense.
What I find interesting, though, the thing that's so interesting is as things are getting better, and of course you say, have a smile on your face, which I think is right. We need to have optimism and gratitude. Depression is higher than it's perhaps ever been. So I think one thing we have to recognize about the human condition, sort of our natural way of being, is that we look for problems. Yeah, we look for problems because of the way that we, evolved. And I am a person of faith, but so whatever that means to you. But we are wired to recognize what's wrong, what's not going well. So even though objectively we can say, gosh, look at how we live, and why are we so depressed? Why are we so maybe it's too good. Maybe we don't have enough hardship. Maybe we're too coddled. Maybe we have to put things in perspective. So I think this is all really good discussion to have, and we need to check ourselves in our perspective. And Jim, I want to wrap up. As I've gotten to know you over the last few years, and just even on this podcast, I can see that you're a very principled, intentional person. I mean, you're very intentional in the way you invest time, money, health, and so I'm curious, what do you see as the spiritual purpose or the moral mission behind your work at the White Coat Investor? And how do you keep that mission alive when the pressure to grow and monetize, to be part of the system, is, bearing down on you?
Very early in the history of the White Coat Investor, really day one, we decided and we was me at that point, but we decided the right format for this entity was a for-profit business. And we recognize that there are things you can do as a nonprofit. There are things you can do as a volunteer organization that are wonderful and that are better than can be done with a business. But there are some things that are better done by a business. For example, the fact that we make money allows us to hire staff and to reach more people than we'd ever be able to reach otherwise. It allows us to have a scholarship program. We fund a financial educator program to, reward a doctor every year that's been trying to educate his or her peers. We have a champions program where we literally try to give a copy of the White Coat Investor's Guide to Students to every first-year medical and dental student in the country. We get it to about 70% of the medical students, but we literally pass out, thousands and thousands of books every year just to try to increase financial literacy. But the reason why I actually think that's important in the long run is I think a financially comfortable doctor, a doctor who's not worried about his or her finances, is a better doctor. I think they're taking better care of patients. They're less worried about the bottom line and more worried about the patient in the chair in front of them. They, can be better partners. They can be better parents. And I think really empowering them to have these wonderful lives allows them to touch the thousands of lives that they touch. And create, a chain reaction. So it's not just, the fact that if you can make a doctor financially literate, that's probably worth a couple of $1 million toward them over the course of their life. And you multiply that by 1 million doctors in the country. But then you multiply that by 2,000 patients a doctor per year. Yeah. And you're really affecting a lot of lives for the positive. And so that's what gets me up in the morning and continuing to plug away at my work, both in the emergency department as well as at the White Coat Investor, even, years beyond having enough money. And so it's been a wonderful journey, and I feel grateful and honored to be able to continue to do it.
I think it's a good reminder that we are all so interconnected, and we can't forget that what we do matters, how we treat each other matters, and there is a ripple effect. And so our challenge to each of our listeners today is be intentional about what is your purpose? Why are you doing things? How are you spending your time? Why are you spending your time that way? What are you thinking about? How much are you evaluating yourself? And don't worry so much about what's happened in the past, because you can't change that. But the now is the seed that will be planted, and tomorrow will bring, the fruit. So if you guys love our podcast, like our podcast, please subscribe. Please leave us a positive review. Everything helps. And our purpose, Jim, is not financial, at least at this point. We're doing this because we believe that there is value in discourse, and we believe there's value in getting this stuff out there to colleagues and to extend important life messages to orthodontists and beyond. So we really appreciate your time and insights. I feel lucky to be your neighbor and to be able to call you a friend. And I know that you're really busy. For anyone who doesn't know Jim, he's the White Coat Investor. He does a podcast, several times a month. So give him a listen. Obviously, he's been a great guest here, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's been a privilege to be here.
Thanks so much, Jim. This has been an awesome episode. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed your practical approach to everything, keeping us grounded. I can see why you and Brian are friends. I can see how, you ground him, and he probably stretches you in ways that you may not want to be stretched. But I think that's amazing. Well, that's going to wrap up today's episode with Jim Dahle of the White Coat Investor. Brian mentioned some podcasts. I think you also have an online publication. Jim, where can people read more of your thoughts?
Yeah, we try to package up this information about financial literacy, et cetera, into whatever format you like to consume it in, whether that's social media or whether that's email or online courses or books, or whether that's reading a blog or listening to a podcast or video cast. It's all available and centered at whitecoatinvestor.com.
Beautiful. I love it. Nice and clean. I would expect nothing less from you. That's fantastic. We really enjoyed the conversation. I hope all of you out there listening found it valuable. If you haven't already, as Brian said, make sure to follow our episodes so you never miss one of these. Take a moment to give us a rating. It does help us reach more listeners like you. And if you're a vendor in the orthodontic space interested in partnering with us, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out anytime at orthodonticpearls@gmail.com to learn more about sponsorship opportunities and ways we can collaborate. And as a reminder, sponsorship opportunities go for as low as $100. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Thanks to all of our hosts and Jim Dahle for being with us, and we will see you next time.
We are so excited to announce that the 8th annual Orthodontic Pearls Conference will be held at the Talking Stick Resort and Casino in Scottsdale, Arizona from November 6th through the 7th. Yes, if you have any kids, they'll know all about 6-7, so you can't forget the dates. It will also be a rock music theme, so you and your team can bring out your inner Freddie Mercury, Steve Perry, Jimmy Page, Slash, and so many more while learning from the best speakers in orthodontics. It's going to be a total blast. Early bird tickets go on sale now until October 10th for $500 off doctor tickets and $200 off team member tickets. We are the last remaining large independent orthodontic meeting run by orthodontists for orthodontists. You can earn 15 or more CE credits, view 50 exhibits, connect with over 500 colleagues, and enjoy an incredible social event we have planned for you with live music from the world's only all-orthodontist band, Relapse. We have both live and virtual options where you can earn CE credit either way. Be sure to reserve your ticket at orthodonticpearls.org/MOPC-2026 today. That's orthodonticpearls.org/MOPC-2026. We hope to see you there.